Hey there, I'm Sara Porritt, and you are tuning in to the Hear Us Roar podcast. Join me for inspired conversations with Asian women chatting about how ideas and passions can ignite truly transformative journeys. On today's episode, you'll learn about how Pooja Agarwal enlivened the culture of Birchbox by championing creative problem solving and really valuing the customer experience. And since Pooja's a personal friend, our conversation also became a safe space where we could talk about our intimate relationships, not only with our own identity, but also with those whom we love and care about the most. As someone who didn't really choose a traditional path, I know all too well how much it means to have the love and validation of my parents, while at the same time having to balance that with my own ideas of personal fulfillment. Pooja opened up to me about a really special moment that she shared with her mom and dad.
There was a turning point for them a couple of years ago, and I think it might be age, or I'm not sure what it was, where they did have a turning point and they were like, "Are you happy?"
Oh.
Which I never really thought I would hear my parents say about like my career.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually like kind of meant the most to me. To hear your parents say that, especially like fairly traditional Indian parents, for them to have had something click, and to me it is them really feeling that American lifestyle, right? That's very different than how they grew up in India. And like for them to feel like, is my daughter happy? Meant like the world to me.
As the Chief Operating Officer at Birchbox, Pooja needed to grow and scale a new beauty industry business model by troubleshooting how it all works. If you don't have time to spend hours perusing down the beauty aisle, testing out every single lipstick and concealer, well, you're in luck. Pooja's team figures out exactly how to test, curate, and source all the best stuff, and they'll make sure that it shows up right in your mailbox. Let's have a little chat with Pooja.
We grew up in a little town called Montgomery, New Jersey, before it blew up to what it is now. It's now a massive town. And there were not many Indian families there. One thing we did have was we had a really close family friend circle growing up. And so I knew I had peers and I knew people like me were out there. And so I never felt like really alone in that sense. But in school, no. Like I had moments in middle school, I remember so vividly, of people being like, "You're different." Especially like in middle school, like dating and having a boyfriend was like such a thing. Like that you can just like walk down a hallway and like hold somebody's hand. And like I remember people being like, "No, I can't. Like I don't want to have like mixed babies." And I was like, "We're like in 8th grade." And so it was like this weird mix of like knowing that you fit in and also like not at all feeling like you do. But I don't know if I don't really feel scarred by it. I just more so like knew it was uncomfortable. Like I knew something was off, I would say, a lot of the way.
And I know when we talked a couple minutes ago, you talked about how you're very different in a managerial leadership position than some others that potentially are in your role because you want to communicate, you want to educate, and you really want to provide people with resources and have a conversation. Do you feel like that need to understand maybe came from not being understood quite as much when you were younger?
Yeah, I think that a big piece of me is saying like, yeah, I could make a lot of assumptions about you, right? Based on like your position, your role, how long you've worked, like the immediate output I'm seeing. But I also think I learned early on that like when I had those judgments made of me, they were like wrong. And so ever since then, I'm sort of just like, take a step back, don't make the immediate assumptions, and like see what happens. And most of the time it actually ends up being fascinating, where you're just like, it all makes way more sense now. And like, of course I wish I lived in a world where people would proactively communicate and be like, let me just like tell you what's going on. But you can't really expect that out of people, I think people are like really still scared to be vulnerable. And I think I love Brene Brown. To me, I am like super into this idea of like vulnerability and like how do you learn vulnerability. But I think until people can do that, at least just like giving people the benefit of the doubt and asking them a question, to me is like a gateway for like better management and like just people being happier.
I can't say that I'm surprised that Pooja has such a thirst to understand people. After all, she did major in both economics and anthropology, and actually credits anthro for being a big influence in helping her to develop her business savvy. Pooja's quite the social butterfly, although she claims to be an introvert. With such a unique combination of interests, I was really curious what Pooja's plans were right out of college.
So I graduated college in the amazing year of 2008. And
Woo woo, 08.
Yep. And you remember 08, the time where business was booming and anybody could get a job.
Jeez.
And I was like, I went to Michigan. Love Michigan. Die hard Michigan. But I left knowing I wanted to come back to New York because I grew up in New Jersey. And I was like, I really want to work in fashion. And I worked in fashion the summer before. I like was at Puma and I loved it. And so I was like, I'm going to come to New York City and I'm going to work in fashion. And so I left school without a job, which, let's be clear, is like not a popular decision, especially back then.
And hello, how did your parents feel about that?
Awful. I don't think they would like outright admit it, but like, oof, the reactions I got when I come home, they're like, so you're just like coming home? And I was like, yeah. Aren't you excited? And they're like, but then what happens?
At least you have a sister to diffuse some of that tension. I'm the only child, girlfriend.
That's true. But when your sister is like thinking about going to med school at that point and like working on her MCAT, they're like, meh. Or actually, no, not even that. At that point, she was already at Harvard Business School.
Okay.
And so they were like, who are you? And I was like, I swear I'll figure this out.
And you did.
I did. But it took a lot of work, to be honest. Like, I did informational interviews for a really long time because I had to just learn and, like, beg people to talk to me. And then I cold emailed one of the founders of Guilt.
Oh, no way.
I just literally just shot her an email from her website. And I was like, will you just meet with me? And surprisingly, she said yes. And I went in and I met with her, and she was super helpful, super insightful. And then at the end, she's like, would you ever consider interning here? And I was like, yeah, like I got nothing else happening. And not even that, but like the business was cool. And I would say like that's the only common string between like the way I think about my career is like what sparks a moment where you're like, that is interesting. And so I had that first spark. That was like the first time I was like.
So what was interesting to you about Guilt? It
was building something new. Like flash sales didn't exist. They had no idea how they were going to do it. And they were like, we're going to figure it out along the way. And I was like, okay, like I want to be part of that. And I started off working in New York City for $200 a month. And my parents were like, what the hell is wrong with you? Like it did not cover my train ticket from Princeton Junction to New York City every day. But I was like, I just have this feeling, I have this gut feeling this is going to be amazing.
So were you an intern?
I started as an intern in merchandising.
Even for an internship, that's a low pay.
They quickly fixed it.
No wonder she was like, okay.
Yeah. That's that like startup intern life. But
I mean, sure.
It only lasted 1.5 months. And they were like, yeah, this is terrible.
So when you reached out, how did you pitch yourself?
I said, I tried to give her some common ground at first, right? Because I think that's what pulls people in, essentially. And so I was like, hi, my sister also went to Harvard Business School. I, like, love the fact that you're in fashion. Like, would love to talk to you and just, like, pick your brain about, like, what you've done in your career. Let me know if you have, like, some time to chat over coffee. Which, looking back, I'm a little surprised she responded. But I do think like the fact that like there was some level of like a personal connection that could exist really brought her in. But if there's one way I would do it differently now was like adding something about like me and like how I could be helpful to her.
I think that's a really great tip.
Yeah. So I think like looking back, I would have done that. I did a lot of that in the interview, I think, which is why she was like, let me offer you something. I also think, quite frankly, like when I was an intern, I was like a kick-ass intern. Like I took everything on. And I was like, whether or not this works out, like I want to leave this place with you guys thinking like I tried and worked as hard as I could in a way that's like really smart.
And did you apply to any other places before this, or was this just kind of like a shot in the dark? Okay, so this was not like on a whim you did this and that was it.
No. And I think like the misconception a lot of people have is it's like you have a dream and you apply and you get it, and like that's how it works out for like people who've made it. One, I would argue I haven't made it, but I think more importantly, I would say when you look at what happened, it was not easy. Like I must have done hundreds of informationals before I got there. And I would say like I was working like 9 a.m. till 2 a.m. for years at Gilt Group. And not because like they asked me to, because I like wanted to. And that's like what felt right for the business at that time. And I think there's an idea that like some people are lucky and get it all. And there's definitely an element of luck. Like let's be honest about that, right? I was in the right place at the right time. I knew how to navigate that career, but so much of it was also being like, I'm just going to say yes to everything and I'm going to have no ego about it. Like so many people I feel like now have an ego. They're like, I can't do that. And I'm like, I'll go out to the loading dock and like find a missing package. Like, sure.
Why not, right? Especially at that age.
Yeah. And even now I'll still do it. Like we just moved offices at Birchbox and people were shocked that I like was there, and I was like, yeah, I'll set up a product closet. You want me to like crack open boxes, like put products out? And we spent like 3 days doing it. And I don't mind. But I do think like a piece that makes you, one, successful, but two, a good leader is like you can't have an ego about you. Because like what does that really serve?
Right.
And like that I learned super early on with Gil is like put your tail between your legs, take this internship and hope for the best.
And I think what I admire about your experience and your process, and you've shown that over the years, even in your new position, is persistence and patience. But at the same time, I think that you can tell someone to be persistent and patient, and yet it's hard to understand when it's the right opportunity. So how did you, like, what was it in your gut that told you, okay, $200 in a month, this is the right opportunity for me?
I think it's sort of like exactly what you just said. It's your gut. Part of it is like you have to know what you want. And like it doesn't need to be specific. And we were talking about this earlier too, right? Like I would argue right now I don't know what I want next, but I'll know in my gut because I have like the guiding principles behind it. And I'd say the other is like nothing is final. And I really had that idea in my head when I took the guilt thing. I was like, what's the worst that happens? I take it and I don't like it. Leaving Guilt, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I knew that like Guilt had done amazing by me, and I will always love that place for like what it gave me and the mentors and the people. Like I call it like boot camp for anybody who wants to be in business. Like I really lucked out. But I left being like, I have no idea what I want to do next. And like, again, I literally just followed the same path. I just like met with a bunch of people over the course of months, and then I met Haley, one of the co-founders of Birchbox, and just was like in awe of her.
6 months later.
Yeah.
How many interviews and how many
Oh my God. I
chats?
must have met at least another 100 people. It was, and like trying to like have a full-time job and do that is insane. But it's worth it.
What do you tell someone who's trying to figure out their own gut? Like how do you describe how you've been able to kind of hone in on what you believe is real to yourself and distill the signal from the noise?
I think a lot of it is like figure out what's external signals versus internal. There's so much that you've convinced yourself is what you want.
The ego.
Yeah. Or like even the culture. Like
yep.
I think back to like telling my parents, I was like, I'm going to work in fashion. And they're like, what are you talking about? Like you have to sustain yourself. And like I think most normal people would be like, yep, you're right. I do need a paycheck, which can like take care of myself. But that was all like external. Internally, I knew, I was like, there's something about this that I love. And I didn't know what it was. It actually wasn't fashion. It was like serving a consumer that I was like really excited about. Like having a brand and being excited to like create a product for somebody. And I could hear all of that in my gut, but I muddied it with all the things around it.
Did it matter that your parents didn't understand what it was that you were going for?
Yeah. Of course, for me, it definitely mattered. I think there was always an element of fear in what if this doesn't work? Is that going to make it like that much harder to fall? And then I also think like a big piece of it was motivation. I was like, I'm going to prove this is a path. Like I'm going to be different and I'm going to prove this is a path. So it was a mix of motivation and a mix of fear of like, how do you get this to go further? And a piece of it, which sounds cliche sometimes when you say it, and you hear this story a lot, I think, is I didn't want to waste the shot I was given. Like, I recognize I was really lucky growing up. I went to amazing schools in Jersey. I got lucky enough to go to Michigan. And, like, my parents supported me through all of that. And I would feel heartbroken if I was just like, all right, peace. Like, I don't know what to do with any of this. But at the same time, I also would have felt heartbroken if I wasn't happy. Mm-hmm. Because I don't think people came over here just for the jobs and the money. I think they came here to be happier. And
at least we'd like to think that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've convinced myself of that.
I think our parents are like, we just got to survive.
Yeah, they were like,
and
we're
provide
just here.
better opportunity for our kids. But I feel the same way. I'm like, my parents would want me to be happy, right?
Yeah.
Like they would want me to be fulfilled so I can just do this because I should.
Yeah.
The more we talk through it, the more I feel like I'm starting to understand the generational differences in how Pooja and I view our life choices versus how our parents did. In a way, their perspective feels really selfless, and ours could be seen as more selfish. But then I had to remind myself that personal fulfillment and allowing our passions to flourish is actually something that's really great for the world. Why not share the gifts that we were born with? Let's hear about how Pooja ultimately found her way to finding a home at Birchbox. So you leave college, you take some time, and you find this kick-ass job at Guild. And you just go across all these different departments. Mm-hmm. You learn a lot, and then you take some more time off. What was it about Birchbox that made you feel like it was magical and it was the right next step?
It was really that first meeting with Haley.
Okay.
Like, my gut was, like, oozing. Like, I'm not into beauty. Never have been. Didn't understand it.
Fashion, but not beauty.
Yeah.
Really?
I just was like, I just didn't understand what beauty even was, really. And it's probably because I was bad at it. And I was like, who does this? But what I actually later, at my time in Birchbox, learned, I'm actually the exact Birchbox customer, which is hysterical, knowing it now. But, like, back in that interview, I was like, would you even want me? Like, I don't use any of this. But more importantly, I think it was this idea of, like, she was so passionate about her brand and customer that I just, like, vibed off of that really, really hard. And then on top of it, it was, again, that same moment like Guild. They were building a new business model. And they had no idea if it was going to work or not. And I was like, that's cool.
I'm sensing a trend, Pooja.
I know. I like to do the things that people haven't done. They're definitely high risk, and who knows if they're high reward, but they're
it's exciting.
Yeah. Like, how fun is it to build something that nobody's ever done before? Like, I think I get, like, such a high out of, like, it's so nerdy. I'm going to have to say this now. But, like, in operations, even as a field, like, as technical operations, and being like, I need to figure out how to do logistics of something people haven't done before. That is fun. Because then you're, like, inventing a puzzle that nobody's done before. As opposed to being like, here's a puzzle, go look at the box, just, like, put the pieces in. And, like, I'm like, I've never been good at that, nor do I want to be.
You have to be really creative with your problem solving.
Mm-hmm. In a world that has a lot of constraints. Mm-hmm. But the best part about it is you're usually working with people who like that same thing. And so coming to work every day is really fun.
So you just geek out.
You geek out, and, like, you have people who are, like, there because they want to be, because it's hard. You have to choose to be there. Like, nobody's doing that because they want, like, a cushy job. Nobody's doing that because it's, like, this big fat paycheck. Like, you're there because you're motivated by solving really hard problems. And so people have a ton of fun at work. And, like, I'm a big believer of, like, if you're going to spend that much time somewhere, you better love it.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the problems that you had to solve for? Because I don't think everyone's familiar with what an operations role entails.
Problems we've had to solve. Like, how do you get hundreds of thousands of boxes out within like 4 days. And you're just like, yeah, every month I got to get hundreds of thousands of boxes out in 4 days. Or like,
So how?
God, you like
Hire a bunch of people.
You hire people. You get super creative with like how trucking works. Like, I never thought I would know that
Drones. Maybe in the future.
One day. But it's like even problems as like simple as like we've never had to put samples in that many boxes and make sure they went out. And you're like, what? How is that a new thing? But then you realize like it's a new industry that didn't exist before. And so everything was a problem. Even like the basics and the fundamentals of the business was a new problem to solve.
What's one thing that you've done at Birchbox? One change or something that you've facilitated, created that you're most proud of?
I would say it's like this idea of discipline, like creative discipline. I think there's this traditional mentality and operations that exist, which I like really like to fight the world on, is that like you must know the process and the plan and everything must be super scaled and efficient. And I'm like, that's super boring. Instead, I'm like, why don't we create the best goddamn customer experience we can and then make it super efficient and scaled and like really serve its purpose. And I think it's, to me, that idea of like operations can be a truly customer first team building amazing experiences without having to be seen as like the no men, right? Like as opposed to having to be like the people who are like always in a company who say no. Instead, like my team is very much the team that every single time we say yes. And it was a huge culture change. I think at operations, at Birchbox, but in general in most of like the projects I work on, even like outside of Birchbox or anybody I advise, is like that is the biggest change, is that cultural shift to say like we're gonna figure it out. And like of course margins and costs all matter, and like there is a balance of teaching the other team that discipline and being like, yeah, we can do it, but everything we just need time or money. Balance with this idea of like creative thinking. And I think it goes back to a lot of like what you and I have talked about, is like doing things for purpose and doing things for like things you believe in. Then it becomes super easy to do all of that, right? It becomes easy to take risks because you care. And like, I think there's one thing that nobody at Birchbox would question, is that I care. And like, I care to at least give this thing the best shot that we can to win.
Well, let's get to something fun for a second. What's your favorite Birchbox item? Maybe there's one, maybe there's two.
So it's a whole genre, I would say.
My
whole genre is dry shampoo. Love it. Hate washing my hair.
What's your favorite, though? Because I feel like sometimes some of them work really well and some of them, they just do nothing.
So I have a routine. I have a 5-day hair routine that like lets me go as long as possible without washing it.
Oh, I want to know.
And so I use Amika dry shampoo in the earlier days. And then I use Living Proof dry shampoo in the later days. And then if it gets like real bad, and I'm like trying to make it to like day 7, I'm like in R&Co dry shampoo powder land of like, you really got to
So does it increase in intensity? Is that what's happening?
It's like who can soak up the most oil to like make this a thing? But it works. I mean, it is like a dream.
Okay.
And then usually I get like my hair compliments either in like day 1, 2 or in day like 5.
Interesting.
Yeah, like days like 3 to 5 are rough.
Interesting.
But
you're hardcore with this not washing your hair.
I hate washing my hair. Like it takes so long. I have like
and then
really
you have like
thick hair.
Wet hair.
You have to style your
gross.
hair. I'm like, nah. It's once a week.
Let's have a point of reflection, if you will.
Okay.
What's one mistake that you've made in your life that's really helped you grow into who you are? And it could be professional, it could be personal, but just something that's changed how you think or where you are now.
It's a good question. One lesson I learned was when I was younger, I'd say high school, even middle school, whenever I had conflict, my response to conflict was flight. I just like ran away. And as a result, I like actually have very few people in my life from back in those days because I would just like cut it out and peace out. And I think the biggest lesson I learned was like, that's a terrible way to operate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny now I look at my life and I'm super close with my friends from college. I'm like incredibly close from people at work, and I've learned the value in how do you like really build and maintain and keep relationships. And the first time I actually think I ever really proved that I learned that really well was when I went to Stern. It was the first time I ever went in being like, be authentically yourself and like give it all you got. And I like really tried to do that with the relationships there.
Mm-hmm.
And I've made some of the best friends I've had in my life through that. So yeah, I would say like the biggest lesson I learned was like, don't just run away when things get hard, which was like really, I think like I grew up with just a lot of fear about everything.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up a very anxious kid.
And to your point of like earlier of like just vulnerability and the value in that.
Yeah, I was really scared to be like, I fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
Or like, I'm scared of like what happens next, or like, how do we like move past this?
So how did you get over it? Was it just a concerted decision to be like?
It was a decision to just like try, because it was lonely not to. It's really lonely to feel like when things go wrong, people are going to leave you. Or it's really lonely and terrifying to be like, if I mess up, how are you going to like fix that?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've almost overcorrected in some senses, where now I like live this life of like, screw it, let's try it and see what happens in almost everything I do. But it's a way more interesting way to live for me.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, like it took me only up until like 5 years ago to be able to like publicly admit that. I was like so guarded about that. I don't know why. I like didn't talk to anybody about the fact that like I was a shitty friend.
Because there's shame.
Yeah. There is a lot of shame. You feel like you did something wrong when really you just like hadn't grown up yet. So I'd say that's it. What was yours?
Biggest mistake I've...
Yeah. I know. I'm turning it. I'm turning it.
On me. I think I could have been kinder to my parents. I think because I was going down such an unconventional path that they didn't understand, I felt like I needed to be hard. And I felt like I needed to assert myself. And whenever my parents try to make their way into my life and really care about me and show that they care, I tend to push them aside. And I've always had a lot of shame about that. And this is actually the first time I'm admitting that. I'm actually feeling a little emotional. Yeah. Oh. Because they have so much love for me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's hard to like let it in. Like once you've like built up the protection against it almost, it's really hard to be like, I'm going to be open.
Like I can imagine it's similar to like your fashion career. And not wanting to fail, not wanting to even give yourself that option. And I think for me, that made me harder in personality to my parents. And I think over the years, I've really tried to empathize with them and really tried to understand where they were coming from. And I think more and more I'm softening up and really trying to be a better daughter and make up for lost times.
Yeah. What's nice is like you still have time. And, like, you get to do that, which is, like, incredible. Like, I think learning lessons in life while you still get a chance to, like, put it into action is, like, the most amazing thing that you get. So I think it's amazing that you know that now and you're changing it.
Well, thanks for turning the table.
You're
I wasn't expecting that.
She's never inviting me back, ever. Literally.
No, but thank you. What's next for you?
God.
And maybe it's a feeling.
Yeah. You know, secret insider note on this. I knew this question was coming and I still don't have an answer. But I I think what's next for me is still finding purpose. I think there's a world in which I want to help people build businesses and whatever that means. Like, I feel so lucky to have gotten this amazing decade of like working with companies, building something from scratch, learning the really hard lessons so other people don't have to. And so there's a world in which I see myself wanting to help other people do that because you see the passion and excitement it drives for them. And then there's another world where like, I just want to be a great leader. Somebody told me early on, like, if you really want to give back by being an amazing manager and creating an amazing experience for somebody. Because the best thing you can do is watch them leave and do that for somebody else. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden you have all these people who feel like they have a purpose and they feel valued and they feel happy and they feel joy. And all of a sudden 10 hours of their day doesn't feel like work. And so I don't know. I don't know what I want to do. I think I'll know when I know.
Yeah.
And I think no matter what it is, I can promise myself it will bring me joy. Because it's just not worth it if it doesn't.
Thanks, Pooja.
Thank you for having me. This is amazing.
And thank you for tuning into the Hear Us Roar podcast. If you're moved by Pooja's amazing journey, please comment and be sure to hit that subscribe button. Also, pop over to www.hurpodcast.com so that you can stay up to date on all the latest episodes. It's a great way for us to stay in touch so that I can continue to encourage you to see your passions blossom. I'm your host, Sara Porritt, and until next time.